TV has come too.
The turn of the millennium was an interesting time for the gaming industry, but not exactly for the games themselves, but for how gamers interacted and received information about the medium we followed. Gaming journalism was only just now beginning its transition from print magazines to digital, but while the internet was becoming more accessible, it was still very basic. Broadband wasn't as widespread in the US yet, and most sites were still primarily text-based with low-resolution pictures. Services like YouTube and Justin.tv wouldn't go live until 2005, and even then, it and other video services before it were pretty limited by the technology of the time. Quality of videos were incredibly low, size limitations very strict, and decent video production was something only professionals and dedicated media companies had the resources to pull off. On the other hand, the television, which had been around for almost half a century, was the perfect medium when it came to distributing live or pre-recorded entertainment to a massive nationwide audience. By the 2000s, cable TV was available to millions across the nation, and there were channels to cater to a wide variety of demographics based on almost every age group, gender, ethnic background, and special interests. But despite the variety of channels, there never really seemed to be one dedicated to people interested in video games. But this changed in 2002 with the launch of G4 TV.
Hello, I am Morgan Van Web, and welcome to my web of destruction.
Owned by Comcast, G4 was the first and only of its kind, a digital cable channel dedicated exclusively to video games, the people who played them, and the people who made them. G4 boasted a variety of shows over the 11 years of its lifespan. At launch, all of its shows were strictly video game related, but over time it started shifting towards other pop culture subjects. From Judgment Day to Attack of the Show, the network attempted to cover as many corners of the nerd-adjacent world as possible with its original productions. The network was even home to a handful of original animated shows. There was Code Monkeys, a cartoon about the wacky adventures of a fictional game development studio. There was also Happy Tree Friends, a television adaptation of the cutesy and hyper-violent web series. And Spaceballs, the animated series.
Customize your own personal stripper. What do you like? Big hair, big tits, big tush?
Yes.
Well, enjoy, and don't forget to use the complimentary wipes.
Hi there, short, dark, and helmeted.
Hello. Hello.
Why don't you take your hat off so I can see your big manly eyes?
Probably not a huge shock to anyone, but X-Play was one of my favorite shows on the channel, and it was for most people. Initially launching in 1998 as GameSpot TV on a different network, who we'll discuss later, X-Play will become G4's longest running and most popular show. Originally, the show had a mix of both news and reviews, but over time it shifted to just being exclusively about short reviews of the latest games, intermixed with humor and sketches. While it changed hosts and theming several times in its first 5 years, Adam Sessler consistently remained a part of the show since its inception, and would be later joined by Morgan Webb in 2003. The two were a dynamic duo and catapulted the show's popularity to the point of becoming the unofficial mascots of the channel. While plenty of magazines had notable writers and staff, few really had the celebrity status as Sessler and Webb. In a sense, they were kind of the Siskel and Ebert of the gaming industry, but younger and overall less classy. While their jokes and opinions on some of the reviews have aged really poorly years later, I still greatly appreciate the show for what it was, and my time spent watching it. That being said, Meet the Cess will still be pretty funny.
He's heard you call him gay, retarded, uneducated, infantile, humorless, bald, and illiberal.
Did I hurt your feelings?
But he's never heard you say, shut up. Meet the Cess.
If I cared about your opinion, you'd have a television show.
The fun stops here.
Another favorite of mine was Ninja Warrior, which was the American rebranding of the Japanese obstacle course show Sasuke. No, not that Sasuke. Ninja Warrior was to G4 what Iron Chef was for Food Network, a Japanese show that gained a cult following in the States thanks to its charming and exciting contestants and the scenarios they had to go through. From bodybuilders to scrawny salarymen, the young and the old, all types competed in daunting obstacle courses under a strict time limit to gain the title of Ninja Warrior. It didn't matter who you were or where you came from, as long as you didn't fall into the water. And like Iron Chef, the show eventually became popular enough to get its own official American adaptation, creatively titled American Ninja Warrior. It first aired on G4 in 2009 and then transitioned to NBC in USA when G4 officially shut down. New episodes are still airing to this day in 2018. I didn't have any gaming magazines, and my computer access was a bit limited as a kid, so discovering new games was mostly possible through either word of mouth, playing the demo kiosks at Target and Walmart, or just watching G4. I discovered a lot of games through G4, some of which became my own personal favorites, like the first BioShock. In fact, I still remember sitting in the living room watching unedited footage of the game on demand and being absolutely scared by the opening prologue.
Is it someone new?
Being a network aimed at nerds, it should come as no surprise that G4 had a notable online presence. In fact, they even had their own show with hosts interacting with forum posters called G4TV.com, and it featured a rather young Jeff Keighley, long before he would become the Dorito Pope. I used to browse the site frequently on school computers, and I even had subscribed to their email newsletter and would get weekly updates on the hottest gaming news, like how Final Fantasy XIV won't have leveling or XP, a petition to port Alan Wake to PC, and Mario and Peach's sex tape. Oh, okay. G4's forums were also one of my earliest entry points to internet communities, and while I can't show you my old posts from back then since the forums are gone, I do remember my forum signature, which was a obnoxiously large demotivational picture with a screen cap of Brawl. I don't actually remember what it says though. That's just what it was in 2008. For this video, I went back and watched a lot of G4's early content, stuff like Cheat, Cinematheque, and plenty of others to refresh my memory on what the channel had offered. But I think the show that really impressed me the most was Arena, as I had never heard of it until very recently. Originally hosted by Travis Oates and a baby-faced Will Wheaton, Arena was a game show with contestants competing in various multiplayer games across various genres. Think of something like Nick Arcade, but with actual video games this time. While most of the episodes and matches were self-contained one-offs, there is one grand event that I think stood out from the rest and is worth mentioning, and that is the Halo National Championship. Despite being something tacked on late in development and not having online features, Halo Combat Evolved's multiplayer mode proved to be a massive hit with gamers and brought the up-and-coming franchise to new heights in such a short amount of time after release. In conjunction with Bungie and Microsoft, G4 hosted the first ever championship for Halo CE, and it put its competitive scene on the map. After days of qualifying rounds and thousands of applicants across the US, 16 skilled players remained and were sent to G4 sets in California to compete in the final matches. Why this really stands out to me is because this was not only one of the first official Halo tournaments, but possibly the first time anything like this had ever been televised for such a large audience. It's completely basic compared to today's massive esports events with huge venues, corporate sponsoring, and awkward celebrity appearances, but that should be expected. It was a bold experiment that set a precedent for many more events to come, and I strongly believe that G4 deserves credit for setting that foundation. Gaming tournaments, however, weren't the only major events that G4 broadcasted.
G4 live at E3.
Look at what's playing on TV. I can't believe it's for real. just happened to flip onto G4. I can't even describe what I feel. Believe it or not, I'm watching A3. I never thought I'd get in so easily. Watching all day.
From 2005 to 2011, G4 were the exclusive television broadcasters of the Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3 for short, the biggest and most prominent gaming trade show in the world. And like a lot of people, their broadcasts were my primary way of watching the event live. Getting info on the biggest announcements from the convention was never difficult, but it wasn't like today where you get the info the very second that it's announced. There was always a waiting period for it to start trickling in. You either wait for your monthly magazines to come in the mail, or wait for some guy to post about it on his GeoCities page, or, I shit you not, buy DVDs of the presentations. If you didn't have good internet or money to burn on videotapes, G4's solution was the most optimal. And this worked for the most part with very few complaints, until 2007. You see, G4 is a TV network, and like all TV networks, they need to show ads to viewers every now and again to, well, keep the lights on. Unfortunately, G4 made the very poor mistake of showing ads in the middle of Microsoft's conference, right as they showed off the first look at Halo 3 and Mass Effect.
And 27, these mild-mannered reporters will don their spandex and face an army of celebrities.
To say viewers were mad is an understatement. Forums everywhere were lit up with rage and explicit comments about G4's boneheaded decision to go to break during such an important moment. It would be like watching the Super Bowl and the station cutting the break just before the last touchdown, or watching the final episode of your favorite crime drama show only for it to cut to black at the final clip. But G4 learned from this and would later make future conferences commercial-free. Despite this rather rose-tinted look at G4, I started to realize that I didn't really know much about the network. Or rather, what I knew was what I saw on the surface. It wasn't until I started putting this video together that I began to really understand the multitude of problems the network had behind the scenes, many of which were happening early on. In summer of 2002, Wheaton and Oates would walk away from Arena, much to the surprise of everyone involved, and in January the following year, Wheaton had posted a journal entry on news aggregate site Slashdot explaining he and his co-host's reasons for quitting. According to Will, constant friction and conflicts behind the scenes with the show's producer Jim Downs and higher-ups at G4 created a frustrating environment for not just themselves, but for much of the film crew and contestants involved. For example, despite how big of a deal the Halo Championship was, the contestants weren't regarded very highly by the producer, who was, quote, talking about them like they were an annoyance, and lucky to be even on the show, end quote. In addition, executives at G4 demanded the tournament to be cut down to 22 minutes instead of its originally edited runtime of 44. In fact, for the entirety of the show, at least during Will Wheaton's tenure, contestants did not receive any reimbursement for their time, aside from cheap pizza, and once word about the poor treatment got out, many stopped signing up to participate, which forced G4 to use its own crew to take their place. While the show continued to go on with new hosts, the drama behind the scenes was just one of the many problems the network's management had with both its crew and its fans, which only got worse with the acquisition of Tech TV a few years later. Tech TV began as ZDTV in the late 90s, an offshoot channel jointly owned by Ziff Davis, a magazine publisher, and Vulcan Incorporated, an investment firm started by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. No, not that Paul Allen, this one. As it was intended to be a companion to Ziff Davis's affiliated tech websites like ZDNet and magazines, It had a strong focus on consumer electronics and other kinds of computer technology. After ZDNet was acquired by rival CNET in 2000, ZDTV would rebrand itself as Tech TV, and in 2004, Vulcan Inc. would sell the network to Comcast, who promptly merged it with their G4 channel, forming G4 Tech TV. The acquisition of Tech TV could have been a huge benefit for G4. In fact, one of the primary reasons for the takeover was because it had a larger, established viewer base, and it was available to far more cable subscribers in both the US and internationally. And yet, their response was to just get rid of everything that made the network successful. Most of Tech TV shows were cancelled or changed completely, like The Screensavers, which was eventually rebranded as Attack of the Show in the transition. X-Play was the only Tech TV original show that managed to mostly avoid too many egregious changes during the merger. And to add insult to injury, not only would the Tech TV branding be dropped entirely within a year, but a lot of G4's own original programming that was running since day one would be cancelled soon after the merger.
I'm a crew over there, my boys from G4. C-A-D! Yeah, G4's in the house. How many of you guys like the idea of a 24-hour video game channel? Don't be like MTV. Keep it video games 24/7. I don't want a video game reality show. No video game characters sharing an apartment. All video games all the time on G4. Maybe we can get a Cataro show.
There goes the next season.
Instead of keeping with its video game focus, G4 decided to shift towards being essentially Spike TV Lite, a trend that began roughly sometime around 2006 and was due to a change in management. Neil Tiles, who was formerly an executive at ESPN and Fox Sports, was now chairman of the network. According to Tiles, the shift was due to his belief that going outside of the network's specific niche would appeal to a much larger demographic of young men, and that by focusing on games 24/7 would be boring, because not many people really wanted to watch games being played. Many new shows were added to the lineup, but none had the same level of impact as either G4 or Tech TV's early content. G4 was a network that originally sold itself as a thing for gamers and nerds, but new shows like Campus PD and It's Friggin' Science and endless reruns of Cops and Cheaters never really found much of an audience, and they drove away any existing ones. The 2010s were a painful and slow decline for G4. DirecTV, a satellite TV provider, dropped G4 from its listings as a result of low ratings. Original programs were getting dropped and cancelled left and right. G4's biggest stars, Kevin Pereira and Adam Sessler, both left their respective shows in 2012, and syndication deals for shows like Heroes, Cops, and Cheaters expired. There was an attempt to sell the network to the WWE, but that went nowhere. There was also an attempt to rebrand the network as the Esquire Network, based on the men's magazine of the same name, but that also went nowhere. From 2013 to 2014, the channel was put on autopilot and sent on its death march to oblivion, where it would live out the last few days with reruns. Unsurprisingly, many cable networks had already dropped the network by then, with only a handful across the country broadcasting it. G4 Canada surprisingly stayed on the air for a little longer, but by 2014 it too was also on autopilot, and just pretty much served as an outlet for reruns of syndicated shows until its official shutdown in 2017. It's easy to blame G4's decline with the changing times. Their primary demographic of 15 to 20-something-year-old males were gradually moving away from cable TV and to internet content, which had advanced dramatically by the late 2000s. But I feel that that's not telling the whole story. They knew that video games were popular. They understood that tapping into that demographic would be incredibly lucrative, but over the years, it was clear that the higher-ups at the network didn't fully understand why people liked the channel. Perhaps in hindsight, gamers were too niche of a demographic to sustain a nationwide cable TV network. Even Tech TV was in a bit of a decline before its buyout. And I think that even if it did continue to properly treat its creators and viewers with some respect and appeal to them, I feel that G4 still would have gone into decline because of the internet catching up very fast and because their audience were tech savvy enough to not bother with cable TV. But even with all its problems, its corniness, its outdatedness, I have a lot of fond memories with the network because G4 was something that could have only existed in the 2000s. Its formatting, its content, and its ethos, and all that stuff still fascinates me years later because they weren't just products of their time, but they were very much ahead of the curve. G4 was appealing to a niche market and fulfilling a need for instant access with the resources they had available. It was a great example of older, larger media companies trying to ride on the massive cultural and technological shifts the US and most of the world underwent during the turn of the millennium. They saw and capitalized on the trend of professionally broadcasted gaming events, shows, and personalities years before anyone else. Years before other media giants like Warner Brothers and Disney would do so. And I think that they deserve credit and respect for that. In the end, I give G4 3 broken consoles.
Oh, it's so sad. Nobody is home. Hello? Such a failure, such a failure.
Out of 5.